Hello guys. So last class we discussed the arrival of Christianity. We studied the major contributions of the Celtic Greece. We also studied the contribution of Alfred the Great and his legacy. We stopped with Alfred's successors, that is the accession of Edgar. So with Edgar, we have the last phase of the golden age of Saxons. He's called Edgar the Peaceful because his entire reign was extremely peaceful. So for 16 years he was the undisputed king of all England. Now it is during his reign that we have Saint Dunstan. Now Saint Dunstan was his chief advisor as well as his close friend. Now when you consider Saint Dunstan, you have to understand he uh, entered the monastery as a student, and then later on he introduced Saint Benedict's rule. And with Saint Dunstan as his advisor and friend, you have to understand Edgar. His rule was extremely peaceful, and you find there was peace, there was prosperity, and this peaceful period came to an end with the death of King Edgar, and that is in 975 AD. Now, at this point, with the death of King Edgar, what happened was there was once again, anarchy because he had two children. Edgar the Peaceful had two children, two sons. One was Edward, and the other was Ethelred. Now, Edward, he was barely 16 years old, and he was actually the rightful heir, but he was murdered. It is rumored, it is understood, it is believed that he was killed by his stepmother, that is the second wife of Edgar, and also Ethelred's mother. And after Edward was killed, Ethelred becomes the king. Now, because Edward he died quite young, he is known as Edward the Martyr. Now, with Edward's death and with Ethelred becoming the next king, there were a lot of changes. Now, during Ethelred's reign, you have the second Danish invasion. You have to understand the first Danish invasion was put to rest. It came to some kind of peaceful conclusion with during Alfred's reign. Now, the second Danish invasion takes place during the reign of Ethelred, and Ethelred, the name Ethelred basically stands for wise counsel. All right, but this Ethelred, the second Ethelred, he is known as Ethelred the Unready because he was not a very wise king. He was rather finicky. He was not prepared. He did not have good advisors. He did not have good counselors to help him. Now, as before, at this point, you find Danish pirates. They had started to raid different parts of England, and this could have actually been controlled had there been a good leader. But Ethelred, he was not a strong leader, and he was not. I'm not saying he was not strong enough. He did not have military power, but he did not have the will. He was not as strong-willed as Alfred or Edgar, for that matter. So now he could not take firm decision, and since he did not have good advisors, now the decision taken by him and his council of ineffective advisors were to pay off the invaders. So this was the first mistake committed by Ethelred the Unready. So what Ethelred he does is he basically begins to pay off these Danish invaders. Now, each time these Danish invaders, they got this money, that only motivated them further. So they came back for more and more money. So this basically, moved into sort of a practice where Dane geld, that is, direct tax, were levied on the people to pay off these Danish invaders. So you find Dane geld, that is the direct tax, was imposed on common man. People were already finding it difficult to, live under, such I would say, unsteady ruler. And here you have a leader who begins to tax. So things were not really smooth now. So you have the direct tax being imposed on the people, and they were finding it very difficult. And each time this bribe was paid to the Danes, it was again a sort of a further invitation for further raids and attacks. And many of the Saxon cities, they basically fell victim to the Danes. They lost control. The Saxons lost control to Danes. Only London, only the city of London, thanks to what Alfred did, the city of London was able to defend itself, was able to defend herself due to the hardy, very strong, powerful burghers. So it is basically, I would say, the weak vacillatory nature of the king and the wrong decisions that he made, which basically destroyed the hard-earned peace, the so-called peace that Alfred struggled for and Edgar maintained, that was completely destroyed during Ethelred the Unready's rule. Now, if that was the first mistake, things only get worse because there was something else that he did. Now, on the feast day of Saint Bryce in 1002, suddenly, unexpectedly, Ethelred decided to do something. So, on the feast day of Saint Bryce, King decided to teach the Danes a lesson. So what he did was he actually ordered the massacre of Danes who had settled down in Wessex. Now these were not the Danes who invaded or raided, but rather they were the Danes who had settled down peacefully in Wessex. And with the massacre, you have to understand in the massacre, you also have King Sween's sister. She too was massacred on the feast day of Saint Bryce. So, in the carnage that followed, many of the Danes who had settled down to a very peaceful life in England died. They were killed, and among the dead was the sister of King Sween Folkbeard. The King Folkbeard's sister was also among the Danes who were killed. So he obviously was angry. So he wanted to retaliate. He wanted revenge for what was done to his sister. And as a sort of a revenge, what he did was he launched a massive attack against England. And they had a huge force. And Ethelred, he realized that he was not ready to, fight. He knew he was not strong enough to withstand this attack. So what Ethelred did was he ran to his wife's country. That is, he was married to Emma of Normandy. So he runs away to Normandy with his wife. Emma was the daughter of Richard, Duke of Normandy. So here you find Ethelred basically runs away from his own country and leaves his country, you know, often open to attack. And at this point, you find King Sween Folkbeard. He brings his son. He brings his son to England. And Edmund Ironside. You have Edmund Ironside, who's actually son of Ethelred. He fought against Canute in the Battle of Ascendew. despite a very strong or strong, I would say, a really worthy effort. Despite the worthy effort, you find he was actually defeated by Canute, and you find in 1016. In 1016, so now with Canute as the king of England, you find there was once again the return of peace. You find when Canute ascended the throne, he was not just the ruler of England, he was also the ruler of Denmark as well as Norway. So the reign of Canute is basically the last period of stable government before the Norman conquest. So he was not simply a chieftain, but he was a king of vast lands like England, Denmark, and Norway. And I believe he is almost like Alfred because he was a wonderful soldier, he was an able conqueror, and he was also very diplomatic. So, very mature, wise young man. And the first step that he takes is that he marries Emma. That is, he marries the widow of Ethelred. And when he marries Ethelred's wife, that is Ethelred's widow, you find immediately he gets the seal of approval from the people of England. And with the arrival of Canute, people of England, they really don't have to worry about the Danish invasions any longer. Because after all, he is also the king of Denmark. So once again, you find people, they settle down to a very peaceful sort of an existence under Canute. And they really liked him. They really liked him for his leadership as well as diplomacy. So during Canute's rule, what changed was that since he was a king of these three, vast territories. He had to travel. He had to travel across sea to look after all these realms. And when he was away from his land, he needed people to, oversee, manage affairs. So what Canute did was something remarkable. He appointed deputies. He appointed deputies, and what he did was he basically he created a sort of an hierarchy. So he grouped the Anglo-Saxon shires into blocks, each under a earl. So under an earl, these earls were given enough power to rule over a particular, block. So during Canute's rule, there was one class that grew into power, became powerful, or rose into prominence, as is mentioned in the text, and that was the earls. That is the rise of the earls. So now during this period, you have earls coming into power, and we have three earls that rose into power. One is Godwin. Godwin, Earl of Wessex, Leofric, Earl of Mercia, and Siward. He was the Earl of Northumbria. So this name Siward is it's quite popular because you get to hear this word, this name in Shakespeare's play Macbeth. So now, when Canute became the king of England, he did not really change. He did not change the practice. He did not change the customs of the Saxon people. He knew it was important to give them their freedom. So, as a king, he gave them their power. He allowed them to, stick to their own rules and laws, and that made him a very popular ruler. Now, like Alfred, he encouraged learning and he became the patron of many monasteries, which basically flourished as centers of scholarship. Now, he even endowed the monastery of a very uh, Saint Edmund with great riches, and he was basically loved by all his subjects, that is, both Saxons and the Danish people who were settled down in England, they all liked him. Now, he was so confident that his subjects they like him that he did not keep an army. He did keep a few followers, that is his personal guard, but he basically disbanded the entire army. And during Canute's rule, everybody started enjoying, they appreciated him, his rule, his people, and he was even looked upon as a sort of a semi-god or a demigod. And there were a lot of stories surrounding Canute that he was able to control the sea, he was able to control the natural the ocean, he was able to send back the waves of ocean and all that. But in 1035, you find he dies and his kingdom was divided among three sons. Now Canute had three sons. Now, the riotous living of his sons were cut short, and again by 1042, very short. So, between 1035 to 1042, you find it is managed, the throne of England was managed between, it was handed over, it was divided amongst his three sons. Nothing really worked out. And by 1042, you find England was again without a king. So you find the Witan or the Witan Mort or the Council of Wise Men. They, thought over it as to who should become the next king, and they decided that Ethelred, remember Ethelred? Ethelred's youngest son, Edward, should be made the king. And you have to understand Edward with he was brought up as a young child. He was brought up where in Normandy, because remember Ethelred the Unready ran off with his wife Emma to Normandy. When King Swede the fourth beard he came over, when he came for the war, when he came to fight, he ran away to France to his wife's. So Edward was basically born and brought up where he was brought up in France. So he was Norman through and through. So the next person who came into power was Edward. Edward was the youngest son of Ethelred, and once again the West Saxon line of Alfred came into power. And there was no opposition because Edward's mother was also Emma. And because Edward's mother was Emma, there was absolutely no problem, there was no opposition from the Danes. Because she was also the widow of King Canute. She was the widow of Ethelred the Unready, and when Canute died, she was again, once again, a widow. So next, we have to learn about Edward and how he became Edward the Confessor. So you have to understand one of the craziest, or I would say, interesting marriages of English history was when Ethelred married Emma of Normandy, and their only surviving son was Edward. Now, during the time of his father's uncertain rule, that was Ethelred, England was, completely taken over by the Danes. And since his childhood was spent in Normandy, you have to understand that Edward was more French than English. He was brought up in Normandy, France, so his friends were all Normans. His language was Norman French. The customs and traditions that he followed were also Norman. So when he was crowned the king, you find that he came to a land which was his. It was his land, but he was a stranger. He felt like a stranger. So now you find when Edward the Confessor became the king, he brought with him his people. That is, he brought with him his friends. So a large number of courtiers who were all Normans, most of his friends and attendants, they were all French people. So within England, with the arrival of Edward, there were two parties in court because Edward brought with him Normans, and during Canute's rule, his courtiers were Saxons. So you find there were a lot of there was a division in the court between Normans and Saxons. So the Normans obviously got the king's support, and the Saxons were supported by Earl Godwin. Now this is very important at this point. So now the rise of the two parties at court, the Normans and the Saxon parties, this later on created problem. And during this time, Earl Godwin was slowly becoming as powerful as the king. And Earl Godwin had another idea. He wanted to establish his power. And the only way for him to do this was he had two children. He had Edith, he had a daughter named Edith, and Harold's son. So what he did was he married Edith. And he gave his daughter to Edward in marriage. So now he felt that he was invincible. He felt now he is the father-in-law of the king. So he believed himself to be very powerful. And now you have to understand there is absolutely no attachment. Edward did not want to marry Edith, and you find that even though they were married, you find Edward reluctantly agrees to marry her, and there was absolutely no love between Edward and Edith, and there was absolutely no chance of love between Edward and his father-in-law, Earl Godwin. And there were always tensions between these two, and this became really significant in the year 1051. Now in 1051 there was an event, something happened. Eustace eustace the count of Boulogne, Eustace the count of Boulogne, and the husband of Edward's uh, sister came to England. They came on a very short visit, and on his return, when he went back to France, you find there was this, I would say, rumor that Eustace was said to have behaved very badly when he was in England. And then there was a fighting between people who supported Eustace and citizens of Dover. And you find Edward, he did not really like this fight which broke out. And he ordered the Earl of Godwin to punish people who fought against men of Eustace. So Edward, he basically began to support and side with Eustace, his brother-in-law, and he started supporting the French against his own people. And he forced Earl Godwin to punish people who had fought against Eustace's men. Now, Godwin, at this point, he had enough of these French people and Edward's partiality towards the Normans. So, Earl Godwin, he refused to obey the king because at this point he believed himself to be almost as powerful as the king. He thought he had enough, money, enough support that he could, defy the king. But even though Edward may have seemed to be defenseless or gentle, he was not like his father Ethelred the Unready. He called his army, and very soon he was able to also get support from the other two earls. Now, the other two earls had grown jealous of Earl Godwin, and they were ready to support the king. And Godwin was, I believe, mature enough, clever enough to realize that he was outnumbered. He surrendered. Now, had Godwin not surrendered to the king, there would have been some sort of a civil war. But because Godwin, he surrendered to the king, he was left scot free. Uh, and this was the best opportunity. What Edward did, Edward sent Edith to a convent in Wiltshire. He did not want his wife anymore. He had had enough. And Godwin and the rest of his family, they were exiled. They were asked to go to Flanders. They were sent off to Flanders. And this is how he finds Edward. He basically reclaims power. So when the Godwins, they left England, when they were out of the king's way, he once again, the king, he began to enjoy his power. He began to shower his friends, that is his French Norman friends, with a lot of gifts. And when I say gifts, I don't simply mean the presents that we exchange these days. I mean in terms of land. He used to simply hand over acres and acres of land to these French people. Money and titles were also given. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Archbishop Robert, were his good friends, and so were Richard Sprogg. Now, Richard Sprogg was a master builder and architect of the first Norman castle. And if you look at the architecture of Westminster Abbey, the most important among the churches of England, the place where the rulers of England were crowned, and which is the final resting place of the great men of England, were built on the graceful lines of Norman architecture. So you will have to credit the Normans, especially Richard Scrope, who was the architect not just of the Norman castles, but the other wonderful, I would say, buildings that still exist in England. So you find Edward was more interested in building churches, and his interests were more spiritual than, um, I would say, administration, and that was why he was given the title Edward the Confessor, and must have also been the reason why he sent his wife Edith to a convent. So this was the Norman atmosphere for quite some time. You find during Edward's rule, a lot of people from Normandy, they came over, they crossed the English Channel to visit the king, and they were all most welcome in the court. And during this period, William, the Duke of Normandy, was also, a visitor, a frequent visitor. Now, William, the Duke of Normandy, was actually the illegitimate son of Robert, the Duke of Normandy. He was also William of Normandy before he became William the Conqueror. He also went by another name. He was called the Bastard of Normandy. So, during Edward the Confessor's rule, you have a lot of visitors from France, from Normandy, and among them was William, the Duke of Normandy. So, even though there was no blood relation, there was no connection, they were not really related, who Edward the Confessor and William, the Duke of Normandy, you find there was some kind of friendship. You find really admired Edward really admired William, the Duke of Normandy. So you find Edward was so happy with William's visit. It is said that he actually confided, he shares his decision. It seems he said that he made this promise that he would make William his successor because he did not have children of his own. So William, when he went back to Normandy after his long visit in England, he was very happy. He expected that he would be made the king after the death of Edward. Now, during this time, you have to understand Earl of Godwin, their time of exile. During their time of exile, what they did was they did not simply sit. They got enough people. They made their own little army, and they arrived in England. They arrived in the coast of England. They arrived in 1052 with the Flemish army, and you find his son Harold. His son Harold came with an Irish army, and you find Godwin's also got the support of Kent. So this time, when Earl of Godwin and his son, when they came back, when they reappeared, you find Edward had to acknowledge that Godwins had become powerful. And once again, the Godwins were back in power. And this time it was the Saxons who rejoiced because they were quite happy to be back in power. And many of these Normans, they were sent back home. But Earl of Godwin did not really have, did not, live long enough. He did not become the king. Now, he died in 1053, and it was his son who, was replaced, or his son became the next Earl. So his son Harold became the next Earl. Yeah, during this period again there was peace for a short period, but again there was possibility, there were threats of war from Norway, because the Norway and King Harald Hardrada believed that he had a claim. He believed that he had claim to the throne, that is to the English throne, because Norway had been a part of Canute's empire. Remember when Canute came into power, he was he was the king of Norway, Denmark, and England. So now King Harold believed that he too had a right to the throne. So now the wild Welsh under the leader Welf al Gurf was also getting ready. So you find Harold at this point, he realized that he had to do something to protect his country. So Harold Godwin, he first he defeated the Welsh. He defeated the Welsh in 1062, and then he protected the land from other invaders. And now by 1063, he was so popular that he was made the deputy. He became one of the most able. He became one of the most ablest deputies of King Edward. So you find Harold, unlike Earl Godwin, was not. He was not unpopular. He was very popular. Even the king liked him. But on he was returning to England from a mission in Europe. Harold's ship was it was wrecked off the coast of Normandy. Now he was captured and he was brought to William the Duke of Normandy. Now William of Normandy, he was extremely warm and welcoming. He helped Harold, but at this point, you find William uses his opportunity and he forces Harold to swear an oath of loyalty to him. And that when, uh, if and when Edward dies, that Harold will support William to become the next ruler. Now, 1065 was a very important year for uh, England, because this is when Edward the Confessor, he grew really sick, and in 1066 Edward the Confessor dies. Now when he dies, the wise council, the Wittingmont, they come together and they declare Harold Godwin to be the next ruler. So Harold becomes the king. He becomes he is declared the next ruler, the successor of Edward the Confessor. Now, this was a happy news for everyone in England, but William of Normandy was not happy because Edward had promised William that the throne would be his. And Harold, when his ship was shipwrecked, he had promised William that he would support William to become the next ruler. So now when Harold was named the next king, William of Normandy was not very happy. And Harold had a brother, Tostig. Now Harold's brother Tostig was also not very popular with the people of Northumbria. And they rose in revolt and Harold had to go and help his brother out. And meanwhile, Harold Hadrada. Now, Harold Hadrada is from Norway. Please don't get Harold Godwinson. Do not mix Harold Godwinson with King Harold Hadrada. They're two different individuals. Harold Godwinson is the son of Earl of Godwin, and this is Harold Hadrada. He is the king of Norway. So you have to understand the kind of, I would say, time that Harold, he had a tough time controlling not just these attacks, not just of the Welsh. There were a lot of other attacks he had to, manage. He had to help his idiotic brother Tostig. He had to rescue his brother from the people of Northumbria. And he had to, he of course knew that Willie was not happy and there was a chance that there's a threat. He understood the threat of William of Normandy, and at the same time, you find Harold Hadrada too was ready to attack England at that time. So now you find the Normans enthusiastically took arms for William against England. So William's expedition to England had the blessings of the Pope because Archbishop of Canterbury had a falling out with Pope. So William of Normandy, he arrives in England on September 28th, 1066. Now, when he arrives in England in 1066, you find English army was not there because they were trying to manage the Norwegians. Remember King Harold Hadrada? Harold Hadrada was attacked. He was attacking the northern England. So his entire army was in north of England, fighting against Harold Hadrada. When in the south you find William of Normandy and his army, they were ready there. So you have to understand. Here you find Harold defeating Harold Hadrada, and here, right in the south, you find William with his army. So I am not trying to support Harold, but you have to understand what he was up against. It was not an easy time for him, even though he was named the next successor. He had to put up with a lot of threats. So the first threat he had to take care of was Welsh. Then he had to take care of his own brother Tostig. And then he had to defeat Harold Hadrada. And after he defeats Harold Hadrada, he realizes that William was with his army down in the south. So no English army met the Norman invaders because they were busy attacking the Norwegians. So Harold won a very good sort of a victory over the Norwegians at the Stamford Bridge on September 26th. So the news of William's arrival prevented the English army from taking rest. So they did not really take any rest. They did not, take care of their health. So because they had to march down They arrived in record time at Hastings, where William's army was already stationed. So even though both these, opponents were well matched in terms of strength and bravery, their armies were no match because William of Normandy and his entire army, they had enough time to take rest, get used to the climate and everything. Whereas you find Harold's army had just defeated this huge army of Norwegians, and they did not really get any time to, regroup, take care of themselves, take rest. And the English army was tired after the bloody war, and they were not really ready. So, Battle of Hastings began in October 1066 with all the advantage on the side of the Normans. So even though the Saxons they put up a good brave show, there was really no match at all, and a stray arrow from a Saxon it pierced Harold in his eye and killed him. And you find his brothers also fell alongside, and the house of Godwin came to an end with the death of Harold. And of course, you know the rest. 1066, you have the Norman invasion. You have William of Normandy becoming the next king. So, with that,